Have you ever looked into the eyes of your own father and realized he wasn't seeing his daughter at all? He was looking right through me, calculating exactly how much money he could make off my future. It is a profound, visceral sting when the people who brought you into this world look at a sacred piece of history and see nothing but a dollar sign. They thought they could slip a pen into my hand when I was too young to understand real estate laws. They believed they were dividing up the spoils of a dead man's labor. They had no idea the house had eyes. My name is Iris T. Main, and last night I turned 18. To anyone looking through the brightly lit living room window of our home in Ridgemont, it looked like the perfect family milestone. There was a beautifully frosted sheet cake from the bakery down on Main Street. Silver balloons swaying gently against the ceiling. About 20 guests laughing over old memories. I smiled. I thanked everyone. I played the part of the grateful, quiet daughter perfectly. But just as the party was winding down, my dad leaned in close. He caught me by the elbow near the kitchen hallway. His voice dropped to a low, heavy whisper that instantly turned the warm room ice cold. "When this wraps up, Iris, you're going to sign some papers for your Uncle Wade." He gave me a reassuring pat on my shoulder. "Don't worry about the details, sweetie. It's just a formality." My dad thought my 18th birthday was the perfect day to corner his daughter. He had absolutely no idea that my grandparents had spent years constructing a quiet legal fortress around our family history, and I was about to turn the key. I didn't argue. I didn't cause a massive scene in front of our neighbors or the folks from church. I simply nodded, kept my polite smile fixed on my face. Quietly slipped away into my bedroom. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and executed a precise legal maneuver that changed everything. With a steady hand, I affixed my legal signature to the trust succession, locking the gates permanently. By the time the sun came up the next morning, my parents and my younger sister discovered that the family cabin at Cedar Lake, the savings accounts, and the entire investment portfolio, everything they thought they were about to pocket, was locked behind a legal wall they couldn't even scratch. My dad's face turned completely white. My uncle, a seasoned real estate agent who had already signed a massive deal to sell property he didn't legally own, was frantically dialing his attorney from our driveway. But to truly understand why my own father would try to rob me of my future, we must look back 6 years before the betrayal. We must look back to a golden summer afternoon at Cedar Lake, when my grandfather looked at me and shared a truth that would change my life forever. To understand why my father was so desperate to tear that cabin down, you have to understand the exceptional man who built it. The summer I turned 12, my grandfather Harold T. Main picked me up in his old blue truck. We drove 40 minutes outside of town, down a winding gravel road lined with ancient white pines, so tall they practically blocked out the hot afternoon sun. That was where the family cabin sat, right on the water's edge of Cedar Lake. It wasn't a luxury estate by any stretch of the imagination. The porch sagged noticeably on the south side. The screen door had a temperamental latch that required a specific practiced yank to close. The air inside smelled like a beautiful mix of wood smoke, old leather-bound books, and faint pine resin. "Grab the other end, Iris." Grandpa lifted a heavy wooden fence rail, and I rolled up my sleeves to help him. We spent the entire weekend replacing 3 rotted fence posts along the property line. He never rushed me, never raised his voice. Instead, he taught me how to check for soft spots in the wood by pressing my thumb deep into the grain. "If the wood gives way, kiddo, it's time has come." Inside the kitchen, Grandma Vivian would have cold iced tea and thick ham sandwiches waiting for us on the kitchen table. The very table Grandpa had built with his own 2 hands the year they got married. Later, we would sit quietly on the porch and watch the sunlight turn into liquid gold across the water. "This cabin stays in the family, Iris." Grandpa wiped the sawdust from his weathered hands and looked out across the lake. "But remember this. Family isn't always blood. Family is whoever actually shows up to do the work." I was 12 years old. I thought he was simply being poetic. I had absolutely no idea he was preparing me for a war. That summer became my masterclass in preserving our history. I learned exactly where the water heater tended to drip, which window frames swelled up and stuck during the humid July weeks. how to properly bleed the old iron radiators before the first winter frost arrived. But back home in Ridgemont, the air felt completely different. Our house was fine. 3 bedrooms. A manicured lawn. A garage my dad used as an office for his struggling building supply business. It was perfectly functional. But it had no warmth. My younger sister Kelsey was the undisputed center of my parents' universe. Her bedroom had just been professionally redecorated in gorgeous lavender tones, featuring a designer desk lamp that cost more than my entire collection of books. I was a ghost in my own home. A background character in the story of their perfect family. And slowly, quietly, greed began stretching its fingers toward our sanctuary. A single slip of paper left on the kitchen counter was about to change everything. I'll never forget the sound of my father's knife scraping against his plate the night he decided to sell his own upbringing. Dinner at our house had become a cold, silent affair. My father Greg sat at the head of the table, cutting into his steak with an aggressive, sharp motion. Dad's place is just sitting out there on the water, losing value every single month. He muttered the words to my mother without looking anyone in the eye. The property taxes are eating us alive. It makes zero financial sense to keep it. We should put it on the market immediately, cash out, and save the business. My mother Denise nodded along smoothly, barely looking up from her plate. It really does make the most sense, Greg. It's just sitting empty most of the time anyway. I felt my heart squeeze tight in my chest. I looked across the table and finally found my voice. Grandpa always said the cabin stays in the family. My dad let out a laugh. Not a cruel, roaring laugh, something much worse. A dismissive, patronizing chuckle. The kind an adult gives a child who doesn't understand how the real world works. He shook his head slowly. You were 12, Iris. He was just being nice. He was being sentimental to a kid. Nobody asked me another question. The conversation immediately shifted to Kelsey's latest debate trophy, a regional finalist certificate that my mother had already framed in expensive mahogany. My district science fair ribbon, the one I won 2 weeks earlier, was still sitting crumpled at the bottom of my school backpack. After dinner, I cleared the plates and wiped down the counters in silence. That's when I noticed a glossy piece of paper half hidden beneath the grocery list. I pulled it out carefully. It was a promotional flyer from Ridgeline Development. Premium lakefront lots now acquiring. Top dollar paid for prime real estate. Right there in the corner, written in sharp black ink, was a handwritten phone number. It wasn't my father's handwriting, which meant it belonged to his brother, Uncle Wade. I stood there alone in the quiet kitchen, staring at that flyer. And for the first time I realized something with absolute certainty. My family was already measuring my grandparents' entire life's work in dollar signs. Grandpa Harold passed away 2 years later when I was 14. The funeral was held on a damp gray Tuesday beneath a sky that looked like wet slate. I sat in the second row, clutching Grandpa's old blue plaid handkerchief, breathing in the faint scent of pine that still clung to the fabric. But during the reception, while everyone else exchanged condolences and quiet prayers, my dad and Uncle Wade stood beside the dessert table, talking in low voices. Wade had a thick manila folder tucked tightly under his arm, and my father was nodding intensely. As I walked past, I caught a single sentence. We need to move on this quickly before probate gets complicated. They were dividing up the spoils before my grandfather was even in the ground. The speed of human greed is a terrifying thing to witness, especially when it comes from your own flesh and blood. 2 more years passed in a blur of quiet tension inside our household. When I was 16, Grandma Vivian fell deeply ill in the spring. By the time the June roses were blooming, she was slipping away. During my final visit with her at the hospice facility, she reached out and took my hand. For a woman so fragile, her grip was surprisingly fierce. It sent a jolt of electricity straight through me. She pulled me closer and whispered softly into my ear. The cabin is yours, Iris. It belongs to you. Don't you dare let them take it away from you. Promise me, sweetheart. I looked at her through tears burning in my eyes. I promise, Grandma. She squeezed my fingers one final time, let out a soft breath, and closed her eyes forever. Her funeral felt like a cruel rerun of Grandpa's. The same gray sky, the same cold folding chairs sinking into wet grass. But that evening, I finally saw the true nature of my family. My father sat down at the kitchen table and let out a massive sigh of relief. Relief. Not grief. Not heartbreak. Relief. He looked over at my mother and smiled lightly. Now we can finally get that property sorted out. His voice sounded almost cheerful, as if a terrible burden had finally been lifted from his shoulders. Later that night, the garage door rumbled open. I stood quietly in the dark hallway, holding a glass of water while I listened to my father pacing back and forth across the concrete floor, talking loudly to Uncle Wade on his phone. "Yeah, no, I completely agree." Then he laughed. A real laugh. "Let's get it moving immediately." Standing there in the darkness, I felt something cold settle deep into my stomach. My grandmother's death wasn't a tragedy to them. It was a liquidation event. They used the word business to sanitize their selfishness. They had absolutely no idea that a dusty hallway closet held the exact key to their downfall. Over the next 2 years, the cabin became my sanctuary. My act of quiet rebellion. Every Saturday morning, I drove out to Cedar Lake in the used Honda I bought with my own babysitting money. I patched torn porch screens, replaced the cracked weather stripping on the back door, swept heavy pine needles from the roof because Grandpa taught me that trapped moisture is how a roof begins to rot. And slowly, the language inside our home changed. The cabin stopped being Grandpa's place. Now it was the family property. Uncle Wade started showing up for dinner every single Sunday, carrying his sleek laptop loaded with real estate listings and developer contacts. Finally, one evening, I gathered enough courage to ask the question that had been burning inside me for years. What about Grandma's final wishes? She wanted me to keep it. My mother slowly laid her fork down against her plate. Then she smiled. A bone-chilling smile. "Your grandmother was sentimental at the end, sweetie." Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "But this is the real world." She leaned back slightly and folded her hands together. "This is business. The secrets of the past have a beautiful way of coming to light right when you need them most." By the time I turned 17, my father stopped hiding behind polite corporate euphemisms. "When you turn 18, we'll figure this out as a family." His tone carried an underlying threat. And I knew exactly what as a family meant in his vocabulary. It meant doing exactly what benefited him, regardless of who got crushed in the process. But fate has a strange way of honoring promises. One chilly November afternoon, I was completely alone at the cabin clearing out the old hallway linen closet. I reached deep into the back corner behind a heavy stack of wool quilts. My fingers brushed against something stiff. I pulled it out slowly. It was a thick, sealed envelope with my name written across the front in my grandmother's elegant, unmistakable cursive handwriting. My heart nearly stopped. With trembling fingers, I tore the envelope open. Inside there was no emotional letter. No goodbye message. Only a single business card. Margaret Caldwell, attorney at law. And underneath her name in tiny authoritative font were 4 words that changed everything. T-Main Family Trust. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the card onto the floor. Grandma Vivian had hidden it in the one place she knew my father and Uncle Wade would never bother to clean. Because she knew something important. She knew I would be the one doing the actual work. I slipped the card deep into my wallet, but I didn't call right away. I waited. Watched. Listened carefully to every conversation happening inside our house. Then exactly 3 months before my 18th birthday, my phone rang on a rainy Thursday evening. Unknown local number. I answered cautiously. Margaret Caldwell didn't waste a single second. "Iris, this is Margaret Caldwell. I was your grandparents' attorney." Her voice was calm, steady, and professional. "I need to speak with you before your birthday. There are things you need to know, and there isn't much time." That following Saturday, I told my parents I was heading to the library. Instead, I drove downtown to a modest brick building tucked between a coffee shop and an old insurance office. Margaret Caldwell welcomed me inside and opened a massive leather-bound ledger across her desk. Then, she looked me directly in the eyes. "Your grandparents saw the writing on the wall 6 years ago, Iris." Her expression never changed. "They knew exactly what your father and uncle would attempt the moment they passed away." She slowly folded her hands together. "So, they built a fortress." I felt my pulse pounding inside my chest. "They moved the cabin, the assets, and the entire estate into an irrevocable trust." She paused. "The total value is approximately $2.1 million. The room suddenly felt smaller. "It does not belong to your father." Another pause. "And on your 18th birthday, control transfers completely to you." I couldn't breathe. Every terrible conversation, every manipulative smile, every whispered phone call in the garage, suddenly it all made sense. But then Margaret's expression turned serious. Very serious. "You need to be careful, Iris." She leaned slightly forward across the desk. "Someone has been making inquiries at the county recorder's office about the cabin's title within the last month." The revelation of the trust changed the entire legal landscape beneath my feet. Margaret explained that because my grandparents transferred the property into the irrevocable trust while they were still alive and healthy, the assets never officially entered their personal estate. Which meant one critical thing: the cabin completely bypassed probate. My father and Uncle Wade had absolutely zero legal claim to the land. The title had already been securely recorded under the trust's name at the county office 6 years earlier. My father had been living in complete darkness the entire time. I looked down at the paperwork spread across Margaret's desk and asked the question that had been haunting me for years. Why did Grandpa keep all of this a secret from his own sons? Margaret lowered her glasses slowly and glanced down at the documents. Then she answered quietly. "Your grandfather said," and these were his exact words. She paused. "My sons will sell that cabin before the funeral flowers wilt." The room fell silent. He knew their character, Iris. I drove back home that evening with my thoughts spinning wildly inside my head. Every instinct inside me screamed that something terrible was coming, and I was right. The very next Sunday, Uncle Wade arrived for dinner looking unusually confident, almost excited. The second dinner ended, he and my father disappeared into the garage together, pulling the door shut behind them. But they didn't close it all the way. There was a tiny crack left open, barely an inch. Just enough for me to quietly step into the hallway, press my ear against the cool wood, and listen. Wade's voice came through first. Sharp. Fast. Frantic. "I already signed the purchase agreement with Ridgeline for $450,000. My stomach tightened instantly. "But the developers want a clean title by next month." "Greg, how do we get it clean?" My father answered without hesitation. "Quitclaim deed." The words hit me like ice water. "Dad's gone. Mom's gone. We're the legal heirs. We quitclaim the property to ourselves, record it, and sell." Wade immediately jumped in. "Exactly." I could hear papers shuffling across the garage workbench. "If we sign the transfer documents before Iris turns 18, the county clerk won't even look twice at a routine family liquidation." Then came the sentence that made my blood run cold. "By the time anyone asks questions, the cabin will already be dust." I pressed my hand against my mouth, trying not to make a sound. "She's 17, Greg. She can't do anything. We'll toss her 50 grand for college later. She should be grateful." Grateful. That word echoed through my head like a gunshot. My own uncle had already signed a binding contract to sell my grandparents' sacred land for nearly $500,000, and the entire plan was built on deception. Forgery. Greed. Lies. I quietly stepped away from the garage door with my heart pounding so hard it felt painful. I had exactly 9 days left before my 18th birthday. 9 days to stop them. 9 days to turn their perfect plan into their worst nightmare. The countdown had officially begun, And the stakes could not have been higher for my future. I stood frozen in the darkened hallway with my breath trapped in my throat and my fingertips turning numb. My own family was planning to bulldoze our history for a corporate paycheck. That very night I locked my bedroom door, pulled out my phone, and sent a direct text to Margaret Caldwell. "They're accelerating." Her response arrived less than 3 minutes later. "I expected that. Come see me Saturday. We'll prepare everything you need." Saturday morning felt less like a legal meeting and more like preparing for war. Margaret's desk was covered in county statutes, property maps, and real estate timelines. She didn't waste time with complicated legal jargon. She went straight to the strategy. Margaret tapped the desk firmly with her pen. "The exact second you turn 18, we file a public notice against the property title." I leaned forward, listening carefully. "It's a legal lockdown." Her voice was calm, but deadly serious. "The moment that stamp enters the county system, the land becomes completely frozen. Nobody can sell it, transfer it, or touch a single stone until a judge reviews the file." I felt my pulse hammering harder with every sentence. "If Wade attempts to file a quitclaim deed, the county recorder will reject it immediately, because the chain of title won't match the trust records." Then, she looked directly at me. "But we must act first." The weight of the moment settled heavily onto my chest. I swallowed hard, and finally asked the question that had been haunting me for days. "Should I tell my parents?" Margaret slowly removed her reading glasses and folded them carefully onto the desk. "Your grandfather specifically asked me to protect you, Iris." A pause. "Not negotiate with them." I drove home in complete silence afterward. The closer I got to our house, the harder my heart pounded. Then I walked through the front door, and immediately saw my father standing in the kitchen, grinning from ear to ear. "Good news, kiddo." He wrapped an arm around my shoulder like nothing in the world was wrong. "I'm throwing you a massive birthday party. Whole family. Saturday night. It's a big one." He smiled proudly. 18. My mother smiled too. Warm, perfect, convincing. And suddenly, the entire situation felt surreal. My dad was planning a birthday party. My uncle was planning a corporate heist. And I was sitting there at the kitchen table, smiling back at both of them, because I knew something they didn't. In exactly 9 days, their perfect timeline was going to slam into a brick wall. But late that night, as I stared at the glowing numbers on my bedroom clock, one terrifying thought kept circling through my mind. Would my nerves survive long enough to make it to midnight? The night of my 18th birthday finally arrived, and the house around me was completely silent. My parents had gone to bed around 11 o'clock. Kelsey's bedroom light went dark shortly after. The hallways felt heavy, still, almost suffocating. I sat alone at my small desk, staring at the glowing digital clock on my laptop screen, while my heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. 11:55 p.m. 5 minutes left. 5 minutes until everything changed forever. With trembling fingers, I clicked the secure private video link Margaret Caldwell had created for me. Her face appeared instantly on the screen. She was sitting inside her home study, illuminated by a single desk lamp, surrounded by perfectly organized legal documents. Calm. Focused. Prepared. "Ready, Iris?" she asked softly. I swallowed hard and nodded. "The moment that clock hits midnight, you are a legal adult in every sense that matters." The seconds crawled by painfully slowly. 11:59 p.m. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner downstairs, the ticking of my bedroom clock, my own breathing. Then finally, the numbers flipped. 12:00 a.m. Midnight. My 18th birthday had officially begun, and with it, the war. Margaret slid the documents onto the screen one final time. Sign. I took a deep breath and executed the formal acceptance of the trust. In the eyes of the law, I was no longer a child who could be manipulated or cornered into signing away her future. The shield of the T-Main family was now active, and my signature was the lock. From that exact second forward, every single asset inside the multi-million-dollar trust became legally tied to me. The cabin. The accounts. The investments. Everything. My father and Uncle Wade no longer had a legal path to take any of it. Margaret finally allowed herself a small smile. It's done. Relief washed over me so suddenly, it almost made me dizzy. Tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock, I'll file the notice with the county recorder's office. She tapped the paperwork beside her. That freezes the title completely. Any conflicting document they try to file afterward will be automatically rejected by the system. I slowly closed my laptop and stared out through my bedroom window into the dark, quiet night. Across town, completely unknown to me in that moment, Uncle Wade was still awake inside his apartment. His laser printer was running hot, spitting out stacks of forged confidence and desperation. He had a quitclaim deed ready for my father's signature. A finalized contract with Ridgeline Development. And nearly $500,000 riding on property he didn't legally own. He believed his deadline was 9 o'clock the next morning at the county desk. He had absolutely no idea Margaret Caldwell was about to beat him there by a full hour. But before the legal hammer could finally fall, I still had to survive breakfast with my family. Because downstairs, waiting beneath the birthday decorations and fake smiles, my father had prepared a public trap of his own. The afternoon of my birthday party arrived, and our living room was packed with about 20 people. Longtime neighbors, friends from our local church, and a few of my dad's old business contacts. Even Nora Beckett, who lived next door to the cabin at Cedar Lake, had driven into town. She sat quietly by the window with a glass of lemonade, watching the entire room. I moved through the crowd accepting polite cards and small gifts, but my mind was focused on the folded piece of paper hidden inside my jacket pocket. It was my copy of the signed trust agreement. Right after the cake was sliced, my father stood at the head of the dining table and tapped his glass with a silver spoon until the room went silent. He placed his hand on my mother's shoulder and spoke loudly. Our family has been going through a difficult financial time, as some of you already know. But Harold and Vivian left us an incredible asset, the cabin out at Cedar Lake, and as a family we've decided to sell it to secure everyone's future and create a college fund for Iris. My mother smiled warmly and added, "It's what responsible families do. We sacrifice for each other." My father lifted his glass high with a wide smile on his face. "Iris knows what's best for this family. Don't you, sweetheart?" The room fell completely silent. Every neighbor and every church friend was staring at me. I slowly placed my glass on the table with a sharp clink. "No, Dad. I never agreed to sell Grandpa's life away." The smile on his face disappeared instantly. A heavy silence filled the room as Uncle Wade stepped forward from the doorway. "Come on, Iris. This isn't the time or place." I looked directly at him. "You're right, Uncle Wade. This isn't the place. The right place is 8 a.m. tomorrow morning." My public refusal shattered their entire plan in front of 20 witnesses. Within 15 minutes, the guests started making uncomfortable excuses and quietly leaving the house, because they could already feel the storm coming. The moment the last guest stepped outside, and the front door clicked, shut, the masks finally came off. My father slammed his hand onto the dining table, his face twisted with rage. My mother turned toward me in the kitchen, her face pale, and her voice shaking, with a terrifying mix of anger and desperation. She stepped directly into my space and slammed both hands onto the counter. "Your father's business is failing, Iris. We are only weeks away from losing this house. And you went behind our backs to lock up the only thing that could save us?" I stood completely still, refusing to back down even an inch. "I visit that cabin every single weekend, Mom. It isn't just land to be sold off. It was Grandpa's entire life." My father slowly pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. He folded his hands together like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "Tomorrow morning, Wade and I are going to the county office. We are filing the paperwork and the cabin is being sold. If you choose to fight your own family over this, then you're completely on your own. No more help with college. No more living under this roof." I looked at both of them, the two people who were supposed to protect me. My heart was breaking, but my resolve was turning into steel. "I am part of this family, Dad. I'm the only one still keeping the promises we made to the people who built it. I walked straight past Uncle Wade and past my sister Kelsey, who was crying quietly on the stairs. Then I locked myself inside my room and waited for morning. At exactly 8:30 a.m. the next day, my father grabbed his briefcase and gave me a confident nod from the doorway. "We'll be back by lunch with this sorted out, Iris." I watched his car pull out of the driveway, knowing that 30 minutes earlier at exactly 8 o'clock and Margaret Caldwell had already delivered the legal knockout blow at the city recorder's office. At exactly 9:05 M. Greg and Uncle Wade walked up to the counter at the county office, completely confident. Wade gave the clerk a quick nod and slid his quitclaim transfer deed across the polished counter, expecting the entire process to take less than 10 minutes. My dad stood behind him with his hands in his pockets, looking around the office like the deal was already finished. The clerk pulled up the parcel number on her computer and typed for a few seconds. Then she suddenly stopped and typed again. Her eyebrows tightened as she stared at the screen before slowly looking up at both of them. "I can't record this document, sir." Wade leaned forward immediately, his confident smile disappearing. "Excuse me?" The clerk tapped the screen calmly. "The property title is currently held under the T. Main Family Irrevocable Trust. It was officially recorded in 2020. There is also a lis pendens notice filed against this property at exactly 8:00 a.m. this morning. The chain of title is completely locked." Wade slammed his hand onto the counter, his face turning pale. "That's impossible. We are the sole heirs. Our parents owned that property." The clerk didn't even blink. "Sir, you cannot transfer a property you do not legally own. This land was moved into a trust 6 years ago. Your documents are rejected. Please step aside before I call security." My father slowly turned toward his brother in complete shock as the truth finally hit both of them. They had been completely outmaneuvered. At exactly 9:22 and my phone rang. I was sitting alone on the front porch when I answered. My father's voice exploded through the phone with traffic roaring loudly behind him. "What did you do, Iris? What did you do?" I took a slow breath and kept my voice calm. "I simply accepted the inheritance Grandpa and Grandma left for me, Dad. That's all." The legal wall my grandparents built had held perfectly, and now the consequences were crashing down on my family. My father screamed through the phone, accusing me of going behind their backs with some secret lawyer. "Margaret Caldwell has been the trust attorney for 6 years, Dad. You just never asked. You were too busy counting the money before the funeral flowers even faded." For a moment, he went quiet. Then his voice cracked, and he started crying. "I was their son. They were supposed to leave it to me." I kept my voice calm, but firm. "They didn't do this because they didn't love you, Dad. They did it because they knew they couldn't trust you to protect it." A second later, the call ended with a violent slam, leaving nothing but silence on the line. But Uncle Wade's problems were only beginning. The corporate developers he had secretly made deals with were already moving to protect themselves. By that same afternoon, the senior legal team at Ridgeline Development discovered that Wade had sold them a completely fraudulent contract based on false ownership claims. They didn't just cancel the deal. They immediately filed a massive civil lawsuit against him for fraud and breach of contract, demanding $100,000 in damages and penalties. But the real panic started when county investigators reviewed the paperwork Wade tried to submit. He hadn't just tried to bypass the trust. The documents contained a forged notary stamp. In his desperation to save himself, my uncle had stepped directly into a felony investigation. Later that afternoon, Margaret called me to confirm everything. Her voice carried the full weight of the situation. My uncle hadn't just made a legal mistake. He had committed a serious crime trying to steal my inheritance. And now the state authorities were opening a formal case against him. The entire structure of lies had finally collapsed, and now the damage was hitting home. At exactly 2 p.m., my father walked through the front door, looking like a man who had survived a shipwreck. The pride was completely gone from his face. He sat across from me at the dining table, staring silently at the wood for a long moment before finally speaking. "The business is gone, Iris." His voice sounded hollow and exhausted. "The bank is calling the loans. $180,000. That cabin was the only lifeline we had left." I looked at him, feeling sadness more than victory. "I know you're struggling, Dad. And I'm sorry about the store. But the cabin was never your lifeline. It was Grandpa and Grandma's gift to me." My mother stepped into the room, her face red from crying. They were old. They weren't thinking clearly near the end. I shook my head slowly. They were thinking clearly enough to hire an attorney 6 years before they died to protect their legacy from this exact situation. Suddenly, my father slammed his hand onto the table. "Then, we'll challenge the trust in court." Before I could answer, another voice came through my phone, which was sitting on speaker beside me. It was Margaret. "Mr. T-Main. Contesting an irrevocable trust created 6 years ago with fully documented mental capacity will cost you more in legal fees than the property itself is worth. I strongly advise against it." The kitchen went completely silent. My father stared at me, and for the first time he truly understood something. I wasn't a child he could intimidate anymore. 2 hours later, the phone lines in the house were burning as he called Wade and told him never to contact our family again. Their entire plan had collapsed. And all that remained was the wreckage created by their own choices. A few weeks later, I packed my bags and drove out to Cedar Lake to live in the cabin permanently. For the first time in a long time, it truly felt like home. The property was finally free from every legal battle, and my college education had already been secured through a separate $58,000 fund my grandparents created for me years earlier, the exact amount my father once tried to use as a bribe. One quiet Sunday afternoon in late May, a car slowly rolled up the gravel driveway. It was my younger sister Kelsey, carrying a pizza box and wearing an oversized school hoodie that made her look smaller than ever. She walked up the old creaking porch steps and quietly asked me something with tears in her eyes. "I didn't know what they were doing, Iris. Was I part of the problem too?" I reached over and pulled her gently against my shoulder. "You were just a kid, Kels. Neither of us chose the game our parents were playing." We sat on the porch together for hours, watching a heron stand motionless near the dock in the shallow lake water. We didn't talk about lawsuits or forged documents or the greed that tore our family apart. Instead, we talked about her school projects, the wind moving through the pine trees, and how we were going to repair the old wooden dock together during the summer. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees, the entire lake turned gold beneath the evening light. And in that moment, I finally understood what Grandpa Harold had been trying to teach me all along. A real legacy is not something you sell. It's the honesty you carry, and the ground you refuse to abandon when everything around you starts falling apart. My grandparents couldn't control who my father and uncle became, but they made sure I would still have solid ground beneath my feet when the storm finally came. And maybe that's what matters most. So now, I want to ask you something. If you had one sacred thing in your life worth protecting